Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, this is David Cerns from Haley Marketing, and welcome to today's Lunch with Haley webinar. Today's webinar, we are going to be talking about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, one where I spend a lot of my time doing work. We're going to be talking about crafting your core story. And before we jump into the presentation, I actually want to tell you a little story. A few months ago, I was attending a distinguished speaker series here at the University of Buffalo, and the speaker was Kevin Spacey. And Kevin, I didn't know he was going to be teaching me marketing tricks, but he opened the presentation by telling the audience the following. He said, "Let me tell you the 6 most powerful words in the English language." Now that got my attention. Here's a famous actor telling me the best words that I can use. And he said the 6 most powerful words in the English language are, "Let me tell you a story." Now Kevin was doing this from the viewpoint of being an actor and creating both famous productions on the theater stage, on television, and in movies, but it applies equally well to what we do in the staffing industry, what we do as marketers each and every day. And before we get into really the essence of how to craft your core story, I want to first step backwards and talk about some of the challenges you're going to face when coming up with your core story, and some of the challenges that I think most of you are all too well aware of that just come hand in hand with working in the staffing industry every single day. So let's jump right in and take a look at the biggest problem in the staffing industry. And that's quite simply, you're all the same. Vanilla, boring, providing the same services, recruiting from the same talent pool. You even sell the same way. At least that's what your clients like to tell you. Now, the challenge with the staffing industry and so many people providing very similar services in very similar ways is that this being vanilla, being the same, is a multi-million, potentially even a multi-billion-dollar problem. It's costing you a lot of money because it's taking away your margins. Now, to steal from Kevin Spacey, let me tell you a little story. Somebody told me years and years ago, it was back in the, actually back in the 1990s, and I was listening to a speaker who had formerly been a vice president with Norrell Staffing out of Atlanta, Georgia. His name was Sam Bowers. And Sam was given the task of winning over FedEx as a client. So Sam and his team went out, met with people from FedEx, looked at how FedEx was implementing staffing throughout their organization, and discovered there were significant opportunities for improvement. They came up with an on-site program, some very sophisticated management systems, and they won the business from FedEx, and in the first year alone saved FedEx more than $10 million in staffing costs. Now the next year, they wanted to continue to have FedEx as a client, and Sam was a really smart guy, so he said, we better make sure that we do a really good job ensuring continuity in our service process, so we're going to document every single step is part of the Norrell experience. And they met with the HR managers to make sure they were on board, showing HR everything that Norrell was doing to provide this great staffing experience and to continue to save FedEx lots of money. Then along came year 3. And now there was a new person involved in the process that Sam not so lovingly referred to as the Dragon Lady. And the Dragon Lady contacted Sam and said, Sam, we appreciate all that you've done for FedEx. Would Norrell be interested in participating in our upcoming RFP for staffing services? Now Sam was sort of taken aback, and he said, of course you'd be willing to participate. And then he got the RFP, and when he looked at the RFP, it was almost word for word the outline that Norrell had provided to FedEx the year earlier. They had taken the plan for how to implement staffing and turned it into their RFP document. So Sam followed up with this new purchasing authority and explained, you don't understand. Everything in your RFP was a process that Norrell created. We're the ones who figured out how to help FedEx be more efficient at staffing. We're the ones who saved you tens of millions of dollars. At which point the dragon lady interrupted Sam and said, Sam, I understand, but what you don't understand is that I don't give a shit. And I share this story because that's the cost of the you're all the same. That's the cost of being perceived like everybody else. Now, who am I to tell you this story? Well, I'm not just the speaker. I'm not just the CEO of Haley Marketing Group. I'm right now in the shoes of your client. I'm the HR manager who hears from 20 or more staffing companies a week who are all saying very similar things. I'm the small business owner who gets the occasional call to tell me what great things that the local temp agency can do for my company by helping me find people I can't find. I'm the candidate who desperately wants a better job, comes in for an interview, is promised by the recruiter that they're going to do their best for me, and I never hear back. So when we're thinking about creating your core story, we have to think about these different people, that HR manager, the business owner, the candidate, because we have to come up with a story that doesn't sound the yada, yada, yada like everybody else. The challenge we have is there are 17,000 companies in the staffing industry. To most of the people we're going to sell, to most of the people we're going to recruit, they've heard the message before from somebody else, somebody who looked and sounded a lot like you do. But one thing I've learned in working with the staffing industry for 20 years now is that you're really not alike. I've had the privilege of directly consulting with hundreds of staffing companies over the years, and Haley Marketing has literally worked with thousands of companies over the last 20 years. And every single company we've worked with has had something that has made them unique. You don't all do things exactly the same way. You don't have exactly the same company values. You don't have exactly the same focus in the staffing industry. You don't have the same mission. And what we have to do is find the things that create those bits of difference, find the things that matter to our clients, and that's going to be something I'm going to repeat at least 3 times today, is figuring out what makes you different that matters to your clients, and then doing our best to stop sounding so much like everybody else, to make sure we're not using the same messages that everyone else is using, that we're not using the same sales techniques the competition is using, that we're not relying solely on the same recruiting methods. So we're not even, in the worst case we see companies with the identical pictures in their websites because they really liked the picture they saw on somebody else's website. Or my personal favorite, when somebody says, and this happens to us, hey, this other company has great copy on their website, can't we just use theirs? No, you need to create your own story, your own voice. You want to find imagery that represents your story. Now, if you think about the 17,000 companies in this industry, ask yourself a question. Why do so many people do the same things and say the same things? Is it because they are the tried and true proven best practices? Or is it because that's how they were trained by the company they worked for? And the company they worked for probably came from another staffing company, and that's how they were trained. We sort of hand down our best practices generation to generation without a lot of questioning. It's the safest way to grow a staffing company. Do these same methods from company A to company B work? Yes. But do they make you different? Do they allow you to command higher margins? No, they do not. Then the problem when you don't do things differently, and we've seen this in the industry over the last 20 years or so, is we start getting on this downward spiral. The downward spiral of commoditization. The more we look alike, the more we sound alike, the easier it is for company A to be replaced by company B's services. The easier it is for the HR manager to say, you guys are all pretty much alike, so what's your markup? This downward spiral is something that we see in margins, and what astonishes me, I can understand in 2009 when we're in the midst of the Great Recession why margins would be pushed down. But even today, when there's severe skill shortages in many different areas, we've got a very real skills gap in technology and life sciences and skilled industrial. Yet it's still hard to get those margins up because we have stories that sound so much alike and the clients don't perceive our differences. When we're pigeonholed as a commodity, we're going to have diminishing profits. And unless you want to have this continual downward spiral on your profits, it's time to figure out a new story. Which brings us to talking about building your story. What are you realistically going to do? Well, what we're going to talk about is, for the rest of the presentation, is how you build your own core story. In a competitive industry like staffing, very often it's not the best product or the best service that's the winner. It's the company that tells the best story. I know a lot of people are not big Microsoft fans, but how did they get to be the largest provider of operating systems in the world? They told a good story. They didn't have the best product. They had great distribution. They told a good story. And I'm sure everybody in the staffing industry can think of examples of companies that are really successful, but their services don't really make them that different. They just marketed it better. There are some very big companies that I won't name by name that have a persona that is very different than what goes on behind the scenes. They have a persona that they've created in the marketplace, how they are seen, the image they've created that's far from reality, but that story makes their, and these are public companies, makes their market valuation much higher in terms of a multiple than the average staffing company. That's the power of a great core story. So how do you create a core story? Well, you're going to need to do a lot of introspection, really thinking. First thing you're going to need to look at is your company's core values. Now, these are values, we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but these are the values your company is built on. It's the foundation. Think of it as the bedrock of your business. The core values are the things that you're not going to vary from no matter what someone does. They drive your decision making. They drive the clients you work with. They allow you to choose where to focus and how to deliver services. But that's the foundation to your core story, is having really solid values that represent the owners and the employees of the organization. On top of the core values, you have your capabilities, your strengths, and we're going to talk about a lot of different ways you might choose to define your strengths. We're also going to talk about the number one way staffing companies tend to define their strengths and why you can't use that number one way in your marketing, and I'll save that for a little bit. On top of your capabilities, we're going to talk about solutions. That's getting into your customer's head and thinking about not just the staffing that you provide, but the business problems that you're solving. What are you helping your clients to do or achieve that they can't do better with anybody else? And then what we're going to do is we're going to see how in a little bit you put all those pieces together to create a powerful core story that gets people's attention, creates interest in your services, makes them want to have a conversation with you, and differentiates you from the 16,999 other staffing companies in the industry. So first, we're going to talk about strengths. And I want you to not think about strengths as, what are we good at? I want you to change the conversation, or change the thought process to, what are we the best in the world at doing or delivering? In the book, Good to Great, Jim Collins presents a concept he refers to as the hedgehog principle. And I apologize, I probably should have put this picture in the presentation, but the hedgehog is essentially the intersection of three circles. Circle number one is, what are we the best in the world at doing? That's our skills, our capabilities. Circle number two is, what are we really passionate about? Because if we're not passionate about something we're really good at doing, we're not going to stick with it and constantly get better at it. But if we're really good at something and we're passionate about it, we're going to continue to be the best in the world. And circle number three is, what drives your economic engine? And that means, how do we make money? So in most businesses, we make money based on revenue per X. It could be per employee, per temporary. We could make money based on the profitability per X, not just revenue, but maybe it's gross margin dollars or it's gross profit dollars per X. So again, with those three concentric circles, you're trying to figure out what are we the best in the world at doing, what are we really passionate about doing, and what drives our economic engine. So in staffing, the economic engine we typically think of is, well, our revenue per dollar drives the economic engine. Excuse me, our gross margin dollar drives the economic engine, or our markup drives the economic engine, or maybe it's our gross margin per recruiter, or our sales per sales rep. You need to figure out in your business what's your economic engine and how you best translate that so it's easy for everybody to understand. And then you can think about and brainstorm with your team, what are we the best in the world at doing? The passion you have probably comes out of the vision the entrepreneur, the owner, the executives have for where the business is going, and hopefully everybody on board the team shares that passion, shares that vision, so that you're now creating alignment between what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and how you make money. That's how you start to define the hedgehog, which is the intersection of those three circles, and where you want to be the best in the world. If you've done that very well, you've already created differentiation. Most other staffing companies that are focusing on selling temporary staffing services, selling recruiting services, placing people, not being the best in the world at something specific. Now, getting into the analyzing where you're the best in the world, I want you to think about the capabilities you can build on, your strengths. Will it be things like speed, how fast we are at filling job orders? Will it be our niche recruiting skills? One of the things that I see, and I'm going to tell you a little story about this later, is companies that are afraid to focus, that they want to be all things to all people, but you're not going to be equally good at recruiting for everything. I was at one of our clients' meetings a couple of years ago, and they had a panel of HR experts giving feedback to all of the people in the audience. And what the HR panel members said is, when you're selling to us, stop trying to be everything to us. Tell us what you're really good at doing and what you're not good at doing. We want to know what your recruiting strengths are. We want to know what your servicing strengths are. If they're in alignment with our needs, we're going to work with you. If they're not in alignment with our needs, you're not the right vendor, and that's okay. But I see so many companies that are afraid to pick a strength because they might limit something else, or they'll try to pick too many strengths and be all things to all people. And that niche recruiting is an example where a lot of companies are afraid of getting real specific about where they're really good. Now, strengths can also be in other areas, like how well you communicate with your clients or your candidates. It also may be in terms of how you own specific outcomes. Maybe you're not just about staffing, maybe you're about owning some result for your clients in terms of productivity or output. I'll tell you a story. Oh, I was going to save it for later, but I'll do it now, about a staffing company that we worked with, a firm down in Charlotte. They were mostly a light industrial staffing company, and they realized that their strength was they were really good in manufacturing. They knew that. And what they ended up doing was, over a period of time, they built on that strength. So if today you ask them what business they're in, they would no longer say that they're in the staffing business. They'd say they're in the manufacturing business. And some of their clients, they actually now have ownership of running lines, actually running part of a plant for the client. They have transitioned from being a staffing company to being a solutions company. They took their manufacturing expertise, parlayed that into an entire new way to service their clients. They don't talk about markups and bill rates. They now talk about productivity levels, and they're paid based on the output of the lines they are managing rather than the people they are placing. It wasn't an easy transition, but this was a company that was a traditional commercial staffing firm that took a hard look internally and said, we can be more, we can do more, we can add more value to our clients, and our biggest strength is our deep knowledge of manufacturing. And the really cool part about the story is a lot of the knowledge they ended up building off of was not internal knowledge they had in the company, it was the knowledge of their temporary employees. They had really skilled managers out of the manufacturing world who they were placing on contract assignments, that they just flipped it and said, instead of being a contractor we're placing, work with us to manage these projects. And that's how they completely jumped into providing a new type of staffing service by building off their strengths. Also, if you're going to look at just your service and say, oh, it's our service that makes us different. I'm going to get into that more in a little bit, but avoid that tendency, because if you're going to think it's our service that makes us different, you're one of probably 15 out of those 17,000 companies in the industry that's saying that. Next thing I want you to take a hard look at is your clients. If you're going to find a core story, it's not just about knowing internally what are we good at, what are we the best in the world at, but it's about understanding what's important to our clients. What's the real value we deliver? What problems do we solve? I was at a meeting of a group of staffing owners several years ago, and I remember getting into a very heated discussion with one of the owners. And while I was presenting about marketing and differentiation, I blurted out the statement, you know, no one needs a temp. And a few of the people in the room looked at me kind of strange, and I repeated what I said. I said, yep, no one needs a temp. There's not a business out there that needs temporary employees. So needless to say, most people in the room thought I was a bit nuts. But this one gentleman got particularly upset with me and basically said, well, how the hell do you think I stay in business if no one needs a temp? And I said, well, you stay in business because you provide temporary staffing services, but no one needs a temp. And we kind of went back and forth with him getting more and more upset with me, and me just pushing him ever so gently to remind him of the fact that people don't need a temp. They need something else. Trying to get him to think through the problem. And this guy was probably about a foot taller than me and easily had 100 pounds on me, so I was getting a little nervous about how far I was pushing him. And at one point, he just blurts out to me, he goes, because I kept asking him why people use your services. Why do they use your temps? And he blurts out, because I keep their effing machines running. And then he paused, and I could see the light bulb go off. He goes, oh my, that's the value we provide. I'm not in the temporary staffing business. I'm in the business of keeping people's machines running. That's the real core value I provide. And I said, whew, you got it. We went back and forth, and I really had to push him and constantly ask, why do people use your services? Why are they using your temps? What problem are you solving? So if you think about your business and analyze your clients, why are they really buying from you? Is it because they need a temp, or is it they need something else to get done? And what's the value you provide, and how could you deliver that value? Sure, you can deliver it by providing contract workers or temporary employees by the hour. You can do it by providing recruiting services. But maybe you can move up the ladder and start to do statement of work projects or other project solutions where you own outcomes. Maybe you could completely outsource functions or departments. Maybe you could expand the range of HR competencies and provide a broader spectrum of services to a client, so you're not just staffing, you are really managing a bigger portion of their HR challenges. And maybe there are other ways you can look at the specific outcomes, like the manufacturing example I gave you, where you think about the problem your client has, why they're using temps today, and how you could own the result, the solution to the problem, not just the people per hour. When you own the outcomes, when you take ownership of bigger challenges, you'll find you get bigger rewards. I mean, I love using the example of the the big four accounting firms and their consulting practices. They don't charge markups that are 60, 80, even 100%. They charge markups that are 300% or more of the salaries of the people doing the work. And they command those markups because they go in as consultants, not as staffing providers. They go in to solve business problems. They're still providing people by the hour. That's how they make their money. But they've defined the client problem and their service and their value differently. Now, while we're talking about your clients, I need you to watch out. Pay attention, be careful about your clients, because we're trying to figure out how we solve problems for them, but candidly, they like it that you're a commodity. And think about it from their perspective. If you're in New York City and there's 500 staffing companies, and you're an HR manager in New York City and you're trying to figure out which staffing company to go with, well, choosing the best one amongst 500 is really hard. If every one of them looks about the same, or you can aggregate and say, here's the top 10% that made our cut. Now you can choose between any of them, and all you have to do is say, what's your price? Who gives me the lowest cost for what I need to get done? Commoditizing your services benefits your clients because it makes it easier for them. It gives them all the negotiating power because if you're easily substituted by any other staffing company, they don't need you. It allows, and this is how things like VMS and MSP have come into being, is because it allows the employer to say, I can just get rid of this headache, have a machine do the ordering or centralize the ordering. I don't need the staffing company to talk to my managers. It doesn't really matter anyway. I can have a third party manage it for us because, really it's about controlling the order process and driving down the cost. It's not about the outcome, the end value. And a lot of you who have seen MSP and VMS, whether you love working with it or hate, usually what I've seen is people don't like the disconnect from the client. They don't like the lack of communication. They don't like the ability to really know what value they're providing for the hiring manager. We don't have necessarily different goals in the client because we both want to solve the client's problem, but right now clients want it to be easier and they're learning how to commoditize you more effectively, how to create even more negotiating power because they think it's what's in their best interest. But as you create a core story that shows your value and how your value is unique, you now reverse the power so that you're the one who has more to gain from the relationship. You're the one who has more leverage in the relationship because the buyer can't easily substitute for the value you can deliver. Now I'm going to repeat something I said a minute ago. When you sit down to analyze your strengths and you sit down to analyze what the clients want, it's not about your service. Everybody on today's call, myself included, we're in a service business. So if your service isn't really good, you shouldn't be in a service business. That's sort of the minimum table stakes for being a good staffing supplier, is to provide good service. It's also not about things like how well you listen or the questions you ask when you first meet with clients or even how you build relationships. And I say these things not because they're not important, but because 80–90% of the people I've talked to over the years, when I ask them what makes them unique, the first answer they give me is, well, I know you've heard this from everybody else, but it really is our service. Or it's how we ask questions, or it's how we listen to our clients, or the long-term relationships that we build. The problem with all of these statements is that using these basic descriptions of service is too generic to be real differentiation. People have strong perceptions about what service means in the staffing industry, and that perception isn't very good. So if you want to change somebody's perception, change how they look at you by changing the reality of what you say. So one of the things that I like to do is get a blank piece of paper and in the middle draw a circle, and in that circle write the word service. And then off of service in different directions draw lines, and at the end of each line write one word that is an element of your service. So an element of the service might be our responsiveness, our friendliness, the amount of follow-up we do, the questions we ask are an element of the service. And try to think of as many elements of the service as you can around that one circle. And then for each one of those elements, see if you can't break that down even further. So if you think it sort of looks like an octopus, you got the circle in the middle and all the lines coming out with the first degree elements of your service. And then from each one of those points, more lines coming out, breaking it down further. When you get to the edge of the paper and you've got those tiny aspects that comprise service, each one of those points now is a potential differentiator that you can use to really own, to be the best in the world. So what am I talking about? What are some examples of this? So on the screen now are some examples of possible differentiators, and I'm not going to read them all here. You can see there's lots of examples, but what you're looking for is things that make us different, things where we can consistently beat our competition, things that over the long term, we can become the best in the world at owning. You're not going to own everything on this list. You don't have to limit it to just one. Sometimes a combination is best. So maybe we are a combination of focus or our unique expertise, maybe, or specialty niche, and then a speed. So we're the fastest at filling positions for web developers. So you can combine possible differentiators to create something that becomes the core of your hedgehog, something you're the best in the world at. The challenge you're going to have looking at a list like this is you're going to see lots of things where you can say, hey, we're really good at lots of things on this list. And you should be good at lots of things on this list. But when you market and you sell to your customers, your core story can't be about everything on the list. Because when you kind of vomit up every differentiator, nothing stands out. And when nothing stands out, you sound like everybody else. We also want to look at the types of problems you can solve. So far I was just talking really about analyzing capabilities and strengths. Now let's look at those clients again and thinking about the problems you can solve and break them into two areas. Area number one, what are the staffing related problems we can solve? The obvious kind of problems like the difficulty finding talent, the not seeing sufficiently qualified candidates, or our inability to reach certain talent pools. Resource constraints we have in the organization, either in a functional area that we're going to be staffing for, or resource constraints in human resources. We might be looking at simple ways to just cut costs because we're spending too much money on overtime, or we're looking to better manage and reduce our overall staffing usage. Maybe I'm looking to improve HR metrics like time to fill and quality of fill. Those are all examples of staffing related problems you can solve, and that's one category. Make a list of all the staffing related problems you can solve. The second category are the tougher ones, the more strategic problems. How do you help your clients solve problems from a business perspective? How are you helping drive increased productivity? How are you helping them mitigate risk? How are you helping them contain labor as a cost per unit of output in their business? How are you helping them get the resources they need to drive innovation and capitalize on new market opportunities? You want to make two categories of problems you can solve, our staffing related and our business or strategic related problems, and brainstorm those with your team. And again, just like the strengths or the capabilities, you're not going to pick every problem to focus on, but you may say for certain types of clients, we're really good, i.e. the best in the world at solving this specific type of problems. For other clients, there may be different problems you can solve, and you're not limited to solving one type of problem, but you want to think for different segments of your client base, what problems are you really good at solving? And then what we're going to do with all of this stuff is we're going to weave it into a core story. And a core story quite literally is an educational tale, a presentation, a way you get somebody interested in your value proposition, not just by selling your services, but by educating them, by making them aware of something that they may not have known about. And I'm going to give you a specific process in just a minute. So step one of creating your core story is to clearly define your values. Now, you may remember just a few minutes ago I talked about the foundation being your company's core values. Go look at your website. Are your core values listed? If they're not, sit down with your management team. Talk about them. What are the company's core values? One of the things that I like to do when we do marketing strategy is to ask all the senior managers to fill out a planning workbook, and we ask questions about the company's mission and vision. And very often I find that even the senior leaders, sometimes even partners in a company, will give completely different answers. It is absolutely imperative that everybody in the organization understands and lives by one defined set of core values. And the other thing about core values is try to avoid the motherhood and apple pie kinds of values like, oh, it's our integrity, it's our honesty that make us different, because yes, you need to have a high degree of integrity. Yes, you need to be honest, but those don't differentiate you. Every business needs to be that. You want to try to find ways to come up with values that are unique to you. I was at the Bullhorn Engage conference, and Art Pappas was up there doing a presentation, and he listed, he said Bullhorn went through this exact exercise a few years ago because they were having some issues in customer service, and it made them reevaluate who they were. And they sat down and they redefined their core values, and they did a wonderful job laying out 4 values that drive all their decisions. Haley Marketing, we've done the same thing. We have 6 core values. And then what we try to do with core values is not write them out as lengthy paragraphs, because no one will remember that, but make them into simple statements that everybody can remember. So in our organization, our 6 are, number 1, deliver a wow. We want every project to wow our customers. Number 2, be the best in the world at what we do. Our mission is about making great marketing, world-class marketing, more affordable for companies in the staffing industry. So we're constantly trying to find unique and creative ways to bring better ideas and drive down costs of ideas for our clients. We want to be, our third value is that good isn't good enough. And we've seen people in our industry, you rarely see a marketing firm or an ad agency that gets to be more than 10 years old. And that's because they get really good at something with the client base and they get complacent. And complacency is death. It's death to a marketing company, it's death to a staffing company. So just because you're good at something, you need to constantly find ways to make it better, sometimes even at the risk of selling the services you sell today by selling them in a new way. Some of you may be looking at the whole world of online staffing and thinking, oh, this isn't a threat to us, or maybe this is an opportunity, or maybe it's just scary because here's an industry that's doing temp help at 10% markups. So that's an example where good isn't good enough, and you may have to find a way to work with to somehow embrace the online staffing or the gig economy and bring it into your business to continue to differentiate and deliver value to your clients. Our fourth core value is to deliver share-worthy service. We're never going to be perfect in service. We're going to make mistakes, but overall we want our service experience to be so good that people want to tell others about their experience working with us. Our fifth is to work hard and have fun. Now that is sort of one of those motherhood and apple pie. A lot of people say it, but we really want to make it part of the culture. And that's just a reminder to us that having a great culture is absolutely essential to our long-term health. And our final core value is called the rule of threes, which really drives how we make a lot of decisions, in that when we decide on something, it has to be good for our customer, good for our company, and good for our employees. And if it's not good for all three, it's not a good decision. So I wanted to share those with you because at Haley Marketing Group, if you go to our website and you go to a page that says our philosophy, you'll see those values. If you ever come visit us and you go to our training room, you'll see them hanging on the wall. It's something that we wanted to very clearly, very succinctly define for ourselves, the owners of the company, for everybody who works here, and for how we service our clients. And we want others to see these values and know that we're going to live by these values. And for your business, you can't create a great core story without really solid core values. Number 2 on the list is to choose your key differentiators. Now, every staffing company I've ever talked to had tons of things they were good at. They could break their service down in some of those smaller components to define where they beat the competition. They could give lots of specific examples of areas where they were really good at recruiting. And the challenge with differentiators is usually we can list too many of them. So what we want to do is think about, for the ideal client we want to service, the company we really want to do business with, which differentiators matter the most. So if our client is a small business, having a national scope isn't a differentiator that matters. Having very strong personal attention is. Having very personalized solutions is. Having cost-effective solutions is. So we want to pick out of the list of all the differentiators you might have, which ones matter most based on the clients you want to serve. And conversely, if you said, we're focusing on mid-tier and up, completely different set of values will be important to those clients than if you're focusing on small customers. So the idea here is just to pick the strengths and narrow it down to a handful that are absolutely the most important, and to pick ones that are in alignment with the client base that you want to serve. And before I move on, somebody just asked a question if I could repeat the rule of threes. Sure, happy to do it. So the rule of threes simply says we make decisions based on 3 questions. Is it good for our client? So whatever we're being asked to do, is it good for the client? Is it good for us, Haley Marketing? Because if it's not also in our interest, it's not something that's mutually beneficial, it's not win-win. And then, is it good for our employees? And this is the one that I see a lot of companies don't always think about, is if it's not good for the employees. If you're asking people to do stuff that's in the interest of the company and the interest in the client, but it hurts the employees, you're going to have a lot of turnover. You're going to have unhappy employees, and ultimately that's going to hurt the company and hurt the clients. So it's always got to fulfill those rule of threes in order to be an effective decision. All right, step number 3 in creating your core story is to define your positioning message. And I'm going to give you a couple of ways you can write down your own positioning message. So you can jot this down. There's two ways that I've seen it done. Really what you're trying to do with positioning is answer the question, how do we want to be seen? You're trying to control the message. And you're also in that same statement defining who you want to see the message. So positioning says, how do we want to be seen and by whom? So the first way to do this is you can say to, then you fill in the blank with the target audience. Our company is the one firm that, fill in the blank. So to, target audience, our firm is the one company that, and that is the value you're delivering to this audience or the problem that you're solving, or specifically how you want to be seen by this particular target audience. It is possible to have more than one positioning message. If you have divisions that do very different things, each division should have its own positioning to their client base. If you are selling to very distinct sets of customers, you might have a positioning message that is unique to each customer market segment. Another way to do positioning kind of goes back to where we started the conversation, is to say that ABC Staffing, our company, will be the best in the world at blank, fill in the blank. What are you going to own? And again, I want to pick something that's a core capability that matters to our clients and that we're passionate about. That's what we want to be the best in the world at. It should tie to our company mission. It should build off of our values and strengths. The reason for defining a positioning message is you're trying to get it down to very simple language. I like to equate it to a billboard, and sort of the rule of thumb in a good billboard is 10 words or less. If it's more than 10 words on a billboard, you can't remember what it says. And so the shorter, the better. You want to use just as many words as it takes to convey meaning. All right. Now, just a quick question. Somebody mentioned that the sound went offline. If you can hear me speaking, please just send me a quick message. All right. Looks like it must have been a specific technical issue. Got lots. Thank you very much. All right. So step 4 is now to define what's the value. So what you're trying to do now is you figured out our core values. You figured out our key differentiators. You figured out the positioning message. So you figured out how to say, here's what we're the best in the world at, or here's the value we deliver to a specific client base. Step 4 is the value, and that's sort of translating your positioning and differentiators into a value proposition. And value is about, in the customer's view, and this could be the employer client side or the candidate side, what is the tangible or intangible value we're delivering? So the tangible value you deliver to an employer are things like, we reduce costs by doing X. We help companies improve revenue. We increase productivity. We reduce turnover. You're looking for things that are dollars and cents, measurable value based on your positioning. Intangibles, they're the ones that they're harder to measure, but can be just as important. And especially if you're selling to HR, very often it's the intangibles that are more important. It's the peace of mind you deliver because they know they can trust you to get it right. It's the fact that their employees are going to be happier because they're not so stressed out working overtime and trying to keep up with the internal demands because of the temps you provide. It can be the fact that you are allowing executives more focus on core activities because you're taking care of the hiring challenges. You're reducing time to hire. You're improving quality of hire. A lot of these are not directly dollars and cents tangible metrics, but you can show the benefit that you're delivering to the organization through the combination of the intangibles and sometimes how those translate to tangibles. And maybe I was talking with somebody in the hospitality segment of the industry, and we're really talking about the value of even people they place as housekeepers. And you don't think about the importance of getting the right housekeeper until you've been a customer who's walked into a hotel and found a sloppy room, or you found somebody's leftover, I'll leave it at dirt in the bathroom, or even worse, in your bed. It's disgusting, and it gives you a terrible impression, a terrible service experience. And then what do? You go on Yelp and you leave a scathing review, or TripAdvisor, and leave a horrible review of that property. So the bad person, the bad temp, resulted in poor customer experience, resulted in a big damage to the company's reputation. You as a staffing company, you can drive improved customer satisfaction. That's the value you deliver. And for this hospitality company, that's what we were talking about focusing on, as a value. We translated their abilities into a value proposition of generating more 5-star reviews, because that's what drives profits for the hotel. And finally, I take it back. We got one more thing I want you to think about. This is a quick formula somebody taught me years ago, and I loved it because it's so simple. And in thinking about translating your services into your value proposition, remember this formula. It's referred to as the 3-minute MBA, or R minus E equals P. So very simply put, R stands for revenue. What things do you do as a staffing provider that enable your clients to drive more revenue in their business? Are they getting more products delivered? Are they closing more sales? Are they getting things done faster because productivity is higher? Are they opening a new facility? Are they expanding product lines? Are they increasing their reviews on TripAdvisor? Those things drive revenue. E is expenses. So what things are you doing to drive down cost? Now, sure, you could give a lower markup, that drives down cost, but more likely, something you're doing in your staffing function can allow them to drive down the total cost of labor. Maybe you're reducing overtime usage. Maybe you're increasing productivity, so labor cost as a percent of each good delivered is now lower. You are thinking about how we're helping companies to save money. And of course, P is profit, which is the combination of driving revenue and lowering expense. So as you evaluate your capabilities, you evaluate your value proposition, you evaluate your positioning, think about this 3-minute MBA and say, in what ways are we increasing R, reducing E, or doing both to increase P? And finally now, the magic. Weaving this all together into a core story. So what is a core story? I always like to think about it sort of like, I've been given an opportunity to get in front of a customer and make a PowerPoint presentation, but it's got to be educational. I can't do a sales pitch for my company. I've got to teach them something really meaningful. I got to teach them something, though, that illustrates the impact of a problem that they're having. Maybe it's a problem they're not aware of. I have to illustrate the impact of status quo. If they fail to take action, what happens? I have to illustrate the opportunity to capitalize on a new opportunity or to do something different. I have to show them the opportunity cost of doing nothing. That's part of my presentation. I have to think about what kind of useful data or insights can I share to illustrate all those impacts. Can I have market data that talks about the value of high-performing versus low-performing employees? Can I do case studies from clients we've solved problems for? Can I do my own original market research to find out how is temporary staffing? How are my recruiting services? How are the problems that I own, solving those problems, delivering measurable economic value for the customers we've done work for? We've done a lot of market research recently on the talent side, getting to understand what drives, we've done it in travel nursing and we've done it in IT staffing, IT consultants, what drives their decision-making process. And that original research is invaluable for understanding what the customer, the candidate, really wants, developing a better value proposition for the candidate, and then creating a core story that will enable the staffing company to attract more candidates than their competitors, because they're going to look at how to deal with talent very differently. And then the fourth part of your core story is the solution to the problem. And again, we're still not doing a sales pitch. We're solving the problem. We're teaching people how to solve the problem. But integral to that solution, somewhere as part of it, should be what your company does for a living. So again, your core story is an educational presentation. It illustrates the impact of a problem the customer is having, the cost of staying with the status quo, or the benefit of making a change. It uses real data to show the value of implementing a solution. It teaches them the solution, and it positions what you do as part of that solution, and ideally who you are as being the best in the world at delivering that solution. So a couple of examples. This particular example is a company that their name is FlexiCrew. They've always been about offering more flexible solutions to their clients' problems. They use that as one of their sales tools forever. So we talked to them about, well, what does flexibility really mean? Because in and of itself, flexibility doesn't have any value for the clients. And so we talked about how flexibility on the part of a staffing company, and you can see it on the booklet, becomes the source of a company's ultimate competitive advantage. We talked about the benefit of flexibility to the employer. You can see on screen a package that was delivered to launch a new line of service for this company. And this direct marketing campaign opened the door successfully, with 75% of the people that they targeted who remembered the campaign and saw this company as not being just like every other staffing company, but is really focusing on a unique value that the employer needs. A second example, a client of ours that did a lot of work in light industrial and was hearing a lot of the, we don't need temps, we're not using staffing services. And this was a few years ago when they were seeing the impact of a lot of companies who were just trying to cut costs, and people were doing all the Six Sigma work, which they're still doing, but they were talking about the impact of lean manufacturing and trying to apply lean to the staffing process. And we worked with this company to look at what is the cost of all this lean thinking. And we found some amazing data just by going on Google and searching that talked about lean thinking has a benefit to a point. And at some point you cut so far, you stop cutting fat and you start cutting the muscle off the bone, and an organization gets weaker. And what we were trying to do with this marketing program, this core story, is show that at some point cutting costs becomes counterproductive. And there are ways to do more with less, to increase productivity by being more innovative in how you approach things, not necessarily just by cutting cost. So the educational message, you can see we had a booklet, we had white papers, we had greeting cards to introduce the story about the cost of understaffing. We weren't selling this particular company's services through this story. We were selling the fact that the employer needed to look differently at how they approach staffing, and that this company could help them take that different look. And a third example, and I can't get into too many specifics on this one because this is a new project for one of our clients, but I'll share the foundation of it, which is right now customer satisfaction with the staffing industry is at an all-time low, and 3 below 0 or -3 is what the industry scored as a net promoter score last year. That stinks. That means more people are dissatisfied with the staffing industry than are satisfied. So this company actually used the industry's own data to differentiate themselves, and they showed with a great core story how they're very different. And this company is a best of staffing company with an unbelievable net promoter score, and they showed what they do differently, how they approach staffing from a completely different mindset, but they essentially used the industry data against their competitors who didn't have their own scores to prove they were better than the industry. I like the approach very much because it is immediately separating themselves from the competition in a way that's meaningful to the client, because the client's saying staffing stinks, and they're going to say, well, look at this, the industry's -3, you're right, they stink, but here's what our client scored us, which was in the 70s for a net promoter, which is almost unheard of. And here's what we do, and here's how we focus very differently than the competition does. And they sort of explained how the industry typically services versus what they do, and that's the foundation of their core story. So what you're trying to do is come up with the story for your business, taking the 5-step process I showed earlier, thinking about how to craft it into an educational tale. As you've seen by these examples, we're then looking for how to package the story. So we've seen examples of direct mail, and I've got a couple other examples on screen now. It doesn't have to just be direct mail. It can be done with sales presentations. It can be done with webinars. It can be done when you go speak at events. But the idea is to have some fun, do things to get people's attentions. One company you can see on screen right now, it's pretty easy to see their core story was about the fact that hiring is hard. And so they just wanted to get people's attention by mailing out a 9-inch tall donkey in a box holding a card that says because hiring is a pain in the ass. Another company on here had a series of fun posters, each one illustrating typical problems in light industrial staffing, and then the posters themselves, if you've read the front and the back, would explain this company's positioning and value proposition, but the posters were just an attention grabber. And the key to a core story is you have to get somebody's attention in order to have an opportunity to tell your story. One word of warning: a core story is not going to appeal to every prospect you're going to sell to. And that's exactly what makes it work. A core story is designed to appeal to a specific audience. You're picking your spot in the market. You're choosing your ideal client base, your ideal talent pool. You're designing your services and your value proposition to appeal to that specific audience. You're making sure that your strengths, your processes, your company values are all aligned with your core story. Your core story is built off of that. You're making sure that it's aligned with what that particular customer segment wants. You're targeting your sales and marketing specifically to the people you want to reach. And you're letting go of the rest. And it's really hard for staffing companies to do, because I know every staffing company, or excuse me, every employer may have a need for your services, is a potential client, but that doesn't mean they're the right client for you. And you'll get better results by focusing more effort on a smaller employer base of people who are the right fit for your message, your core story. It's also easier for those people to see your value. Now, one of the things that I see really going on in the staffing industry is a lot of fear. As I mentioned, we've worked with thousands of staffing companies, and I see a lot of people who are afraid of ruffling feathers. They're afraid of being politically incorrect. They're afraid of upsetting anybody. I've seen examples where one person reacts negatively to an email and the company flips out. Well, if you never upset anybody with your marketing, if you never take a risk, you're not going to get anybody's attention. You're not going to differentiate yourself. Not that you should go around trying to tick people off. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to be willing to be bold, to be daring, to take risks. Yeah, you might upset some people. But if you're afraid of standing out, if you're afraid of taking risks, you're going to be on that downward spiral towards commoditization. You've got to be willing to pick your spot in the market and then be the best in the world at going after that particular market segment and winning more of that business than anybody else. It allows you to win your local market, and then it allows you to expand into new markets where you can own that same market segment time and time and again. And as you look at the rest of the staffing industry, and as we wrap up today's presentation, I want you to think about the vanilla. I want you to think about the commoditization. I want you to think about how your customers are saying you're all alike. You all recruit from the same talent pool. And I want you to scream out, to hell with that. I want you to say it's time to take a stand. It's time to focus. It's time to make our firm irreplaceable. It's time to figure out our values, our capabilities, our positioning, our value proposition, and our core story that make us different than everybody else. It's time to really be the best in the world at something that you can own. And then it's time to translate that into more engaging, more impactful, and more meaningful story, marketing, sales, and recruiting for your firm. And my final question is just, are you ready? This ain't easy. It takes courage, it takes vision, it takes commitment. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's the absolute best way to ensure your long-term success. So with that said, we have reached the end. So if anybody has questions, please feel free, use the question window, send them in. I'll be happy to answer it. The slides, if you want a recap of what you've seen and heard today, are available at lunchwithhaley.com. And this webinar has been recorded, so we'll be adding it to the website next week. And speaking of Lunch with Haley, some very big news coming up. Next month, August, is our 20th birthday in serving the staffing industry. We are really, really excited to be turning 20. And in honor of the occasion, we got a lot of fun stuff coming up next month. But next month's Lunch with Haley will be show and tell. And we're going to show off some of our award-winning work and some of our really innovative stuff at our next webinar, which will be Thursday, August 25th. So I hope you can join us. And again, I will stay on the line answering questions for those who have them. But for those who need to go, because we're at 3 o'clock, thank you very much for attending today's Lunch with Haley.